Good morning, Hemshech Tzadik Daled, 5694, page 57. And we are learning this in parallel with Ayin Beis, volume 2, pages 1147 through 1149. What we're learning now is basically page 1148. Bottom of 1148 and moving into 1149. So a few more pages. Again, for those that need a refresher or for those that are here for the first time, we're learning these two discourses side by side because the Frierdiker Rebbe, the son of the Rebbe Rashab, in the year 1933, essentially, this was common among the Rebbeim, the Rebbes, they would take a discourse or a series of discourses from their predecessor or predecessors and review it with their additions. So Frierdiker Rebbe both delivered and wrote this in the year 1933, or the Hebrew year Tafresh Tzadik Daled, beginning Rosh Hashanah. The Rebbe Rashab, where he's citing from and elaborating upon, did this in the Hemshech Ayin Beis, and the exact year would be the end of the year, right? This is basically Rosh Hashanah discourses of the year Tafresh Ayin Vov, which would be 5676. And in English, the English year is 1915. 1915. Okay. So we're going back and forth now, but right now we're in the Frierdiker Rebbe's side of the thing, side of the discussion. So we're discussing the interface, what I've been calling the channel or the field of energy called Ayin. That great channel that connects producer to the product, creator to the created, Yesh Amiti to the Yesh Hanivra. And generally breaks into two levels. The Ayin, the that relates to the source, Ayin Amiti to the Yesh Amiti, and the Ayin, the part of the Ayin that relates to existence. But they're both Ayin and they're both a Lakus and they're both We say relates, it means the divine dimensions that relate to existence. And the language of before the Tzimtzum, we've been talking about the language of Ratzon, a desire for existence, and in desire itself, two levels, desire and the specifics and the pursuit, active pursuit, meaning actively being drawn toward that process, where the first Ratzon is more of a determination. And higher than that, there's an that is not yet even begun the journey or process. It just manifests. It's outside of Atzmus, so to speak, but it's called Kol B'Atzmusei because it's not yet in any state of radiating or illuminating or revealing or transmission. It's just reflection of the divine essence, which what he called Atzmi. Ha'atzmi. On page 57, where he's saying that there is, or in the Asius of Makif and Pnimi, let me just fill the picture, that Makif itself, there's two levels of Makif, meaning Seviv, one that relates to existence in detail. Ratzon is a Makif that relates to existence, the details. Higher than that is the Ratzon Koli, the Makif Koli, but it still relates because something was inspired, something was stimulated. And he says, however, Etzem HaMakif, or Etzem of Seviv, let me just see the exact language. Just 1 second here. The Etzem of, let's see, Makif K'moshu Be'etzem is beyond existence altogether. The reason it's called Makif is because it's removed completely. And from there will originate basically three levels in Seviv, if you wish. One is completely removed, one is a general desire, and one is a specific desire, specifics in the desire. Okay. And the words that he's using now, which is higher than Ratzon, he says that in general, there's the Be'emes Beis Madreges Be'er. One level, the level that doesn't have any relationship, is called We learned that yesterday, the last few lines we learned. And he says this is the primary energy of the primary air that's kol batzmuse, which means for all practical purposes, it's encompassed in the core, the essence of atzmus, because it's not yet function, there's no function to it yet. It's not even developed the kind of idea of a function. So what is its role? Its role that it is the, let's call it the field of energy in which all the next steps are going to emerge. So it's not atzmus, but it's not outside of atzmus. So it's therefore that ultimate interface. It has both elements that it can relate. It can become an energy because it's mitzias nimtza. It's an existential reality that will become the place where everything else begins to emerge. On the other hand, because it's completely bottled and encompassed, it's a true reflection of its source. So, kol batzmus. Now, we added eina kavana. This intention here is not the yechelis of atzmus. I'm using yechelis liberally because it's really what how Samach Vav explains this level. But in the way the actual words in Tzadik Dal is not yechelis. He says it's not the kavana, is the eir hakol batzmus mamish, which is called Shmei HaKadmon. We're not discussing that. And we talked about that yesterday. I'm not going to go over it again because it's not just yesterday, but back in Ayin Beis, I also discussed it. So what are we talking? Ki'im HaKavana, I'm reading from here, the line begins, HaKadmon. Ki'im HaKavana, the intention here, what we're addressing here, who leimer the klolos er shalifnei at simtsum. One second, let me just see. I want to see the language here in Samach Vav. I'm sorry, in Ayin Beis. Okay, so to say the klolos ha'er shalifnei at simsum, that we're not talking about that level that is completely, literally kol batzmuse, which I explained was yechelis, God's capacity to give air. Here we're talking about the general air, the general energy or divine energy, lifnei at simsum, pre simsum, v'chein geder eir ha'sevev klam b'chlal. And the same is the general realm of Sevav Kalam in general, who Eir HaKol Batzmuse, is like an energy that is encompassed in the core, because remember, it's removed from existence, the etzem of Eir Makif. The Klal HaOmur, the Eir Makif. The Klal HaOmur, the Eir Makif. The rule that was mentioned, I'm not sure where was it mentioned. In Ayin Beis, he just says, must have been mentioned earlier, I would think. Klala Omer means that he must have mentioned it earlier. I'm trying to remember if he did, where and when. I may have. Anyway, but generally the principle, the klal, this general principle, about the Eir Makif, the Eir Makif ain't a b'chinas yitzim in atzmus. It also can mean klal omer, not necessarily mentioned earlier. It can mean klal omer, the known klal, like saying klal hayedua. Maybe that's what he means. In other words, there's the said principle, the principle that's stated in general. Maybe he's not referring to what he said earlier. So I'm just pointing out what that word. In Ayin Beis, he doesn't use that word, but he says a klal om b'Eir Makif. What is this klal? That Eir Makif ain't a b'chinas yitzim in atzmus. Eir Makif is called something that did not really leave atzmus. That's why it's removed from existence, because it's a very much of a reflection of atzmus relationship, which is a removed relationship. So this is what we're discussing now. We're not discussing the Eir HaKol Batzmuse Mamish, what he calls Shmei HaKadmon, the primordial name that's literally completely encompassed in atzmus, which means there's no Eir altogether. As I said, Samach Vav calls it the Yechelis for Eir. Here we're talking about Eir. and in general the Eir Lifnei Tzimtzum, and which includes also the general realm of Seviv. That all this is still a reflection of Atzmus. It's not the first level of Shmei HaKadmon, which is not Eir altogether, but this is essentially its whole personality is only reflecting its source, Atzmus, and has no relationship to the objective of creating existence and the worlds. So he says, that the ikir, the primary place where you say Eir HaKol B'Atzmusei is on Etzem HaOir, which is like the Etzem. It's like in the Etzem in its being removed from everything. So it's reflecting, completely reflecting a pure reflection of Atzmus, but a reflection. Or Klala Yedua, like the general principle. See, before he said Klal HaOmer, now he says Klala Yedua, so I don't know, I'm not sure the meaning of that, but I still stand by what I'm saying, more or less. That, I mean, it doesn't change how the pshat here, just telling you the. So what does he say here now? The general rule, the known rule and principle, Klal Yedua, the Kol HaKol Ba'etzem, everything that's encompassed in the core, Harihu Kamoya Etzem. It is like the Etzem. Okay. Now, again, this we learned at length, and I explained it at length when we learned this around 2 weeks ago, or maybe I don't remember exactly, around 2 weeks ago in Ayin Beis. I'll just say this in briefly, but if you want elaboration, go there, because I don't want to give that whole class again. But basically, what he's saying here is like this, and I think I've explained it also in the previous classes. Etzem is completely beyond, you can't even call it beyond, because it's built in Metzias Nimtza, Metziusim Atzmusei, that's Atzmus itself, the Yesh HaMiti. If you only had that, there would be no existence like ours, because everything is about Atzmus. But Atzmus wanted, or Nesave if you wish. Not if you wish, that's the word we should use, Nesave. Can't even call it desired, because all these are words. But Atzmus chose to create a relationship, and he wanted it to be in a logical way. So the way to do it logically is in a progression. You don't just jump from Atzmus to existence, because Atzmus has no problem doing that, but we would have no way to relate to it. We wouldn't understand it, and we wouldn't be able to retrace our steps, as I've mentioned countless times. So the process is that Atzmus, because he has the capacity to do anything, so he chooses that I'm going to manifest in a Metzias Nimtza, something that actually has defined by existence. It's not a non-existential existence, it's an existential existence. And Oyer is the best example to understand that state. Because on one hand, it's completely nothing but Atzmus, because all it is a reflection, but it's not Atzmus. Atzmus doesn't need Oyer, and it's not and that's not all of Atzmus is to give off Oyer. He's not a sun. It's not like the sun and sunlight, as we learned at length. So Oyer becomes the operative word, but Oyer itself is Oyer that's going to relate more to the relationship, and there's going to be an Oyer that's just reflecting Atzmus. But one thing has happened now. It's moved into the state of existential state. So you can't say it doesn't exist, and you can't say it exists like we exist. So you say it's an existential state that reflects the Atzmus. Does it reflect built in Metzias Nimtza? It reflects it only because it reflects everything, but it's not built in Metzias Nimtza because it is a Metzias Nimtza, and it has a source. You can't call it Metzias Atzmusei. The only place you're going to have a direct taste and some semblance, as we spoke, Ktsas Musig in Atzmus, is going to be in the Yesh, actually, because the Yesh has a similarity. It's like Metzias Atzmusei. It feels it's a self-contained entity. Oyer does not have that. Oyer simply is a servant, a carrier of everything. So the Oyer is now in a state of complete pshittus. And that's why you can't call it Hamshacha, you can't call it Gilui. All you say is it's coming from Atzmus. That's what's called Kolol B'Atzmusei. Because for all practical purposes, it's not functioning in any other thing except that manifestation of Atzmus in a form of Oyer. So it's not even a gili of oil. It's just you can call it mitzias nimtz. Kol batzmuse mamish is not even that. That's in atzmus the capacity to do that. Just for the record. Now moving forward, this oil is now going to come to another level that's going to become oil that is going to begin to relate to something besides atzmus. And I explained yesterday why you need both levels. Total bittul, but you also need the relationship. So we need the place where they meet. So that's the story with oil. Okay. So now he's saying in general, the oil lifnei tzimtzum is called kol batzmus, as I explained based on the Rebbe's letter, because everything lifnei tzimtzum is still only sensing atzmus. But in the sensing of atzmus, there can be two levels. One is you sense atzmus and only atzmus. One is you sense atzmus's intention in creating existence. But it's generally, like he says, it's all a kol batzmus, and that includes the oil hagmakif. He said it's not yitzim in atzmus because it is essentially reflecting what atzmus wants, and as such, it's not a yitzia. Oil pnimi is a yitzia because it's actually the oil that will relate to existence. And that's a yitzia. Why is it a yitzia? Because even though it's reflecting what atzmus wants, but what atzmus wants is to be a yitzia in atzmus. That's exactly what God wants. He wants something other. So yes, it's reflecting what God wants, but it's formed like we talked about. It's mina etzem, but not kamaya etzem. If you want something that reflects atzmus, it has to be in a form of blikvul, pshitus. The more shapeless it is, the more it reflects atzmus. So there's what atzmus wants, and there's what atzmus is. If you're talking about what atzmus is in the sense reflecting the source, then the higher levels of do that best. If you're talking about what he wants, the lower levels of begin doing that. But it comes through the higher levels, and that's the steps he's discussing here. As I mentioned, it's for us, we don't really process these steps when we do things. But the fact is also when we want something, we also go through these steps. There's who you are. There's what you want. What you want is an outgrowth of who you are. We're talking about true desires, not nonsense. So what you want is a reflective of who you are, but the who you are is removed from it all. Then it goes into a state of saying, before even you want, it's become some type of state that's existential, and then that moves into what you want, into the details and so on. So when you really slow down the process, if you're able to zoom in and see the process at work, you'll see also these levels. Etzem, Atzmi, and then the lower levels that we're going to talk about now. The higher levels are called Eira Kol Batzmuse because, as I said, for all practical purposes, they're just reflective of who you are. But who you are wants something outside of you. So that's where the bridge and the interface takes on shape and form. Okay. Asher HaMoshel al Zeh. And this again is from Ayin Beis. And now the moshel for this is, what's the moshel for this stage? Bekeiches HaNefesh. Asher HaMoshel Zeh Bekeiches HaNefesh. I should read it, the song is, the moshel for this and the faculties of the soul. Hu Bekeiches HaKlulim B'Nefesh. This is referring to the Keiches HaKlulim B'Nefesh, the faculties that are encompassed in the soul. As I explained, and I'll just again say it briefly, if you see a faculty that's functioning, a functional faculty like moving your arm, writing, throwing a stone, walking, sight, sound, hearing, using your mind, your emotions, these are called Keiches Gluyim. Keiches HaKlulim B'Nefesh is referring how these faculties are encompassed all the way in the soul. Remember, they would not be a functional faculty and a revealed faculty if there was no soul. Take away the soul from the body, all you have is a empty shell. Yes, you have arms and legs and eyes and ears, but there's no life in it, no vitality, and definitely no faculties. So you have to say that these are all kelim. The body is a keli. Without an eye, you also can't see, God forbid. But it's a keli for the oir. What's the oir? The oir is called koyach hanefesh, which has levels. The koyach hagoli is the power of vision in the eye. The koyach hanelim is the power of vision right before it becomes revealed. And the koyach hakol or what he calls keiches haklulim benefesh, is the way it's encompassed, that the soul has the powers of these faculties. But in the soul, as he's going to explain, it's all like kolol be'atzmusei. That's the mashal. So he says, keiches haklulim benefesh, the kamoy shehem benetuyim u'mushrashim be'etzem hanefesh, the way they are planted and rooted, or even embedded in the core soul, shein keiches atzmim mamish shem kamoy etzem. They are mamish essential or core faculties, exactly as they are in the etzem. They're not the etzem mamish because they're keiches haklulim b'ne etzem. That's why you can't call them yechelis haneshama or yechelis hanefesh, like the eira kol b'atzmusei mamish. It's not that, but it's keiches haklulim. So they're, what are they? What state are they in? If you were able to look at them and see them, they're not functional faculties. They're not even revealed faculties. They're not even concealed faculties. They're essential archetypal faculties in the power of the soul, the power to see, the power to hear, the power to think, to conceive, the power to feel, etc. The kamoisha etzem eina begeder hamshacha v'gili, just as the etzem, haneshama, is referring to. Well, it's both the moshel and the nimshel. This goes on both. Just like the etzem is not begeder, it's not in the realm even, not even in the realm of transmission and revelation. He's talking about etzem hanefesh. Same thing, the faculties, ima yeshem keiches levad, even though they're only faculties, they're not the etzem haneshama. The etzem haneshama is higher than faculties. We don't say the soul is a sum of the parts of all its faculties. The soul is an entity, a chelik elikam mal mamish, divine image, however you explain it. The soul encompasses these potential faculties. So he says, just like the etzem is not begeder hamshacha, so too the faculties that are klulim, that are encompassed in the essence, even though they're only faculties, b'komokim harim atzmim. They're faculties in an atzmisdik state, in a core original state. She'enim begeder hamshacha v'gili. They're not yet in the realm. They're not in the realm of transmission and revelation. They will ultimately lead to that. But at this point, where the way they're klulim benefesh, they don't have any of that. And that's why they're not subject to anything. When you say, God forbid, a person gets injured and a certain faculty is compromised, that's the keich hakol benefesh is never compromised. You could say either you could say the keli, the part of the body, is injured. You could say maybe the koyach has compromised because it cannot manifest. You know, the nerves could be damaged. It could be permanent, God forbid, etc. But the koyches haklulim benefesh, the power, let's say, to see, even for someone who's completely blind, God forbid, the power, the nefesh is not weakened by the fact that it's not manifesting. It's there, but unfortunately, it cannot express itself. So if you would say, let's say, an injury that could be healed, then you could say, you know what, the koyach goli now is concealed. When the injury is healed, however you do it, whether through, in time, it just heals itself, or through medication, or through surgery, or whatever it may be, then what you're saying is the keli has been repaired, so the oir really never left, the oir can return. But let's say in a situation where there's fundamental flaw, not just in the injury of the body, maybe even the koyach, whatever reason, the nerves or the messaging, like in a stroke, even in the brain, something happened, etc. But the koyach atzmi, the koyches atzmi are never compromised because they are completely part of the neshama. Would be saying just because a person gets burned, the neshama gets burned? No, that's not the case. Okay. That is level 1 in oir. So let's sum it up. Eir atzmi, it's called. Eir ha'atzmi. Right? In the mashal, it's koiches atzmim. It is only hamshacha is that it's hamshacha mina atzmus, but in itself, it's not in any form of transmission or revelation. That's why we call it eir hakol batzmusei. The ikar part of eir hakol batzmusei is this eir. And now comes level 2 in eir. So you can actually make this like a B. That was A, now is B. The A, that's in a state, the Bechinas in a state of relationship, Ela Elamis, with the worlds, with existence. Hu bechinas is pashtus se'er, loya atzmi. This is now in the level of extension or expression of the er, not atzmi. The first level was called er atzmi, it's core er, meaning that it's not even a form of expression or revelation. Here it's bechinas is pashtus se'er. I want to see the language in Ayin Beis. Does he say bechinas or bechinas? It's interesting. Yeah, I thought so. Friedrich Rebbe makes it bibchinas is pashtus se'er. The Rebbe Rashab wrote about er hashaychus al elmas hu bechinas is pashtus se'er. Loya atzmi. Friedrich Rebbe says bibchinas, which would suggest that this level is already in process of extension. The Rebbe Rashab just says that there's the er atzmi and the pashtus se'er. Er atzmi is like the er, let's say, in the sun, and the er coming out of the sun and is now begins to shine outward. The Friedrich Rebbe adds bibchinas is pashtus, that this level is in the level of his pashtus, which would suggest that his pashtus has begun already. I would think he's hinting, what about the level between atzmi and his pashtus? Is there something in between where the atzmi is beginning to relate to the pashtus? Maybe he's hinting to that. Just a thought, because he adds a base, bibchinas is pashtus. So comparing is very, very interesting here, comparing the two. Okay. The loya atzmi, but it's not the atzmi. The era atzmi, that means. Uba er hazeh, and this lower level of light or energy, shayich leimer hageder ha'omud ba'oyer. Okay, geder ha'omud, now he's using ha'omud again because he did say this, this I do remember, this he did state. In this lower level, they could say the above mentioned realm in Oyer, the kol mashem ispashet, v'nimshech mismayet eireh. That the more it extends, and the more it spreads, and the more it extends, the air gets diminished in the process. If you remember, that was the beginning of the whole discussion before Ratzon. In Tzadik Dal, it was on page 51, in Ayin Beis on page 1147. What was the rule? He said that the ayin breaks into two only because it's oyer, and oyer is subject to diminishment. It's not an atzmi. Yeah. Now he's stating, interestingly, that in this oyer, it seems like he's saying that the higher level of oyer, atzmi, there you don't say diminishment, even though it's oyer, because that's what he's saying. But oyer hazeh, it sounds like he means the oyer hashayich le'elamis. So, just pointing that out, I need to think that through a little more, because once it's turned into oyer, there's two levels of oyer, so the oyer is breaking into two levels. But it seems like he's saying that the higher level of oyer is not yet in a state of diminishment. Not sure the explanation for that, but it could be because it's still reflecting atzmus, so therefore it's still removed from any form of gradation. I don't want to come to anything conclusive. If you're following what I'm saying, you need to review that. But here it clearly says, and I'm looking in Ayin Beis also, this rule, this geder amur, this category, I should say not realm, this categorization, above mentioned categorization that oyer is subject to, the more it spreads, like the light of the torch that he mentioned. The farther you go from it, the weaker is the light. So the same thing is oyer, he says, it's shaykh in this level, subject to what? Again, Mashem Shpasha, Nimshach Mismayet Eireh, V'hainu, the Kol Mashem Nimshach Mispasha Yeser, Hu Yeser B'chinas Shaychus Ela Elmas. Which means, the more it transmits and spreads or extends or expands or the more it has a more closer relationship to existence, to the worlds. And you can relate to it the general desire that we've discussed and the specific desires. All this is Na'ir HaMispashet, not Na'ir HaKolol, not Na'ir Atzmi. Because the Na'ir HaMispashet is now, that's its whole purpose, is to extend. And extension, by definition, means it goes through gradations. And as it goes through gradations, it starts creating more and more of a relationship. So basically, the highest level of Na'ir is all still reflecting me, the Etzem. I say me, I meant it like Etzem HaNefesh. The next levels of Na'ir are relating to the relationship with the other. And the more the Na'ir extends, the more it, so to speak, distances itself from the source, the more it begins to relate to the other. I shouldn't say distances itself because it doesn't really say that. It says the more it extends, the more it manifests. And that's where the Ritzainus that we talked about, both the general determination, Ratzon Klali, desire, and the specific desire for the home, that's where they all begin to emerge in this level of Ispashtus Ha'ir. Okay.
Rabbi Jacobson, this is all applicable pre-Tzimtzum also. So
only pre-Tzimtzum. He's talking about pre-Tzimtzum here.
Yes. So in other words, that second level of Or, the one that we're saying is Shayach to has the klal of Mispashet, also has the klal, first klal also of being like the Etzem.
Well, I explained that length. That's what I explained at length. That okay. All general before the Tzimtzum is generally called Kel Vatzmuse. It's only when you dissect it relatively before the Tzimtzum itself, there are stages. But it's really only stages all within the Ir. If you remember the Rebbe's letter that I explained, discusses in detail. Remember I spoke about the difference in mitzvahs? That there's no difference in a mitzvah because beside the Ratzon Hashem, it's all the same. It's all connected to this. So I would suggest that the posts of previous recordings, go through them and you'll get this much clearer. I'll tell you right now, you're never going to understand this on the first bounce. That's for sure. Not even on the second. You need to review it many, many times. I probably reviewed this myself over my lifetime, probably 500 times that I can consciously remember. You know, thinking about it, learning it, and so on. Maybe even more. I don't even know because, you know, you don't remember every time you think about it. This needs a lot of thought because you have to think of it not in abstract terms, but try to find examples to really relate to it. But we've stated it. I think I tried to do justice to it in all the classes. And my own recollection in the last 4 weeks has been, I've talked about this topic itself at least 2-3 hours, cumulatively. So I would suggest if you really want to get to the bottom of it, I would listen to that. I'd read it again, and go do it slowly at your pace. You know, nothing to be embarrassed of. That's how we all do it. It all takes time till you really can understand each level. Remember, there's a lot being said here. It's not just air, it's Ratzon and the Ayin and the Yesh Amiti, Yesh Aniver. There's a lot of information to unpack here. Okay. I'm just comparing to the Ayin Beis. That's why I keep looking back and forth. Okay. Now, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to stop here, not the class. I mean, I'm going to skip the next paragraph. This is now the end of a Maimer, Sukkos Maimer, by the Friedrich Rebbe, where he goes back to explain, but Sukkos Teshuvah is the Maimer as he began. And I looked through it. I don't think there's anything we need to look through this. It's going to just distract and be very confusing because we're learning the Maimorim and Ayin Beis, which also have beginnings and ends. So as a teacher here, my choice would be, you can learn it on your own if you wish. I'm not telling you not to, but in a way, I have to say, almost apologize to the Friedrich Rebbe, because The truth is you have to learn a mimer like this, but we're not really learning this mimer. We're learning Ayin Beis, and we're trying to understand Ayin Beis through the eyes of Tzadik Dal. So we did this already in the beginning of the mimer. So I'm going to skip page 57.
I still think that it will enrich everything that we learn, even though that it's at the end of a mimer, but still things will come out richer. That's, I think. I don't know if I'm right.
That's why I suggested to all of you, since you all have minds, so read it by all means. I read it already. My strong feeling is not to learn it inside here with you, but I strongly suggest you should read it by all means. And if you get more in understanding what we learned, great. So I'm going to skip now, and also it's the end of a kuntras here. So it's not just ending page, it skips a lot. We're going to jump to page, you'd be surprised what page we're jumping to. Because after this, if you look in your Sefer Maimorim, and we did in the PDFs online, you're not going to see these pages. After this, remember, these came out as contrasim. So it was a mimer, then came a letter, and a sicha. So there's pages upon pages, and then Minhagim the Rebbe included. So I'm skipping all that, I'm going to page 80. From 57 to 80. So it's all on the ayinbeis.com. If you have the Sefer, just skip to page 80, because that's the next mimer, and we're going to continue from there. Okay. So the mimer here is B'yem Hashmini. It says, I'm going to skip the beginning. I'm going to go to Lohavin Kol Zeh Yesh Lahagdim. So, for those not familiar, the way this works is these Hamsheichim, these series of discourses, were written in one flow, and then the Rabbeim added beginnings and ends as they delivered them. The beginnings and ends are connected, but not so directly as the central theme. So Lohavin Kol Zeh would be after he asks questions on the Maimer Shmini Atzeres, Tzadik Dalet. Then he goes and says, to understand this, let's go back to what we've been discussing. So I'm going straight to that. What have we been discussing? So he's going to be now a summary from the Frierdiker Rebbe. And then he's going to continue where Ayin Beis, page 1149. A few more pages, and then we go back to Ayin Beis. Okay. Everybody's on board? So the Lohavin Kol Zeh is actually now a little bonus, because we're getting in the Frierdiker Rebbe's own words a summary of everything we learned. Let's see, maybe there'll be new points, maybe there'll be, we could crystallize some of the ideas. So Lohavin Kol Zeh Yesh Lahagdim Tchila Mashin is Bar Lil. This is the second paragraph on page 80. The ha'ayin shu mamutza ben yesha amiti v'yesha nivra hu mischalik l'shnayim. The ayin, remember this channel, which is called ayin, nothingness. But it really means not nothing, it means bittul really, oyer. It divides into two. The ayin of the yesh amiti, the ayin of the yesh nivra. The tam hadavar hu, and the reason that it divides, hu liyas the klolos ha'ayin hamamutza hu oyer. Being because the klolos ayin, the general state of ayin, the interface is the level of oyer. I want to just see a language here in Ayin Beis. Give me a second. Yeah, it's the same language. Good. So what does that tell us? That it's oyer. Uba oyer. And once you know it's oyer in yone, the kol mashu mispashit yesu misma'it eire, as we just read in the last mimer. The more it extends, when you talk about oyer, the more it gets diminished. Look at the light of the sun. The more it extends, the farther it travels, the more diminished it is from the intensity as it was closer to the source. Ubirze, and he explained this. The Rabbeim speak in the third person, even though it's they that explained it, but they say, Masha nizbar le'il, not masha hizbarti le'il, or shema bi'arti le'il. He says that, and obir zeh, and was explained, b'moshel mikeches hanefesh. And now he's gonna, this is how the flow is. Explains it from the faculties of the soul. Which faculties? B'koyach harotzen, the power of desire. Sheyesh by beis madreges koyach harotzen. Sorry, sheyesh by beis madreges. That has two levels. Koyach harotzen, the power of desire. V'rotzen Hashem mulchus mitziyusei hu hatoya v'hamshacha le'esei hadover shu reitzeh. Now he's calling the power of desire, and desire, which mulchus mitziyusei, the personality of its existence, meaning its identity, is that it is drawn, inclined and drawn to the thing, the object that he desires. So those are the two levels of Ratzon, and the Friedrich Rebbe is saying that we're explaining the levels in Oyer as it travels, it diminishes from the Koyach Sanefesh and Koyach HaRatzon that has these two levels. Ulapomim Nikra, here's the second name that he gave it. Now, instead of saying Oy, now he calls it Laponim. At times it's called Ratzon Hanelam, the concealed desire, but Ratzon Hagali, the revealed desire. Remember, he said earlier those two names. V'hizbir, and it was explained, and he explained, Ha'hevdel sheben heskim v'ratzon b'muhusam ha'atzmi. He explained the difference between the heskim and the ratzon. Now he's calling the heskim and ratzon, the determination and the active desire. B'muhusam ha'atzmi, in their core personality, what's the difference? Ub'mkeim amidasam b'nefesh, and in their geographical or conceptual location in the soul. Remember, he spoke about their location, not just in terms of their personality. That one is located closer to the source, and one is located as it moves closer to the object of the desire. So all this, he's just saying that was explained. Asher klolus hadugma lamaila, now he's bringing it back. This dugma v'keches hanefesh. In Ratzon, the klolus hadugma lamaila, the general example from this above, hu be'er ha-seviv, is explaining the transcendent energy of seviv, because seviv is makiv, seviv is ratzon in keches. U'b'shor she'hakodum, and its original root, ba'madrega shalifnei at-simtzum. So yes, we spoke about it achra at-simtzum because we spoke about the kav and the igulim, and more than that. And now he's saying b'shor she'hakodum, so he's really placing everything very organized. In its original or primordial, original source, root, it's in the levels before the tzimtzum. And here he explains the last thing we just learned. And the extension of light, not the er atzmi, not the core energy, but the extension of it that relates to the world's existence. In this light, he says it explicitly, in this level of energy that extends, not the core that's kolol, that is not even extending yet. On this level, we can say the more it extends, the more it gets diminished. Okay, good.
Question, yeah.
Sure. Go ahead.
Back to our two ors lifnei habtimsum. The or, both ors are kol b'atzmuso. Both ors are of the exact same level, except they have a different mahus. One mahus is just reflective, mahus is just there to extend. But they're both on the same darga, and we don't have any reduction of Misatis Pashtus till after that second level. And they're both totally connected to their source. One is just reflective, and one is purposeful, so to speak. Is that a correct understanding?
It requires a lot more explanation than that because it's before the tzimtzum. You have to understand this is all working within Atzmus's divine consciousness that is basking in Atzmus levels. So I want to make sure that you understand that we cannot exist without a tzimtzum. So for us to talk about before the tzimtzum requires a lot of trepidation and care. And I'm not saying you're not being cautious, but you have to remember when the Alter Rebbe said Atzilus, he would tremble. And I'm not trembling, and you're not trembling, and none of us are trembling, even though we're talking about Lifnei Tzimtzum. So that means we're really not talking about Lifnei Tzimtzum. We're trying to understand it on our level here. So I would say the following. To really fully appreciate Lifnei Tzimtzum, you have to first appreciate much lower levels. Because even though we're learning it, and I'm not going to skip, obviously, that Ayin Beis is learning it, but you could imagine that the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe expected at this point that we have so refined ourselves to the point that we understand Atzilus and Bria, Yetzirah, because to just throw out levels, you could say the same thing. What you just said can be said also about Atzilus and Bria, not Lifnei Tzimtzum. They're all godliness. Atzilus is a godly world. Moichin of Atzilus relates more to what God wants, and Midas relates more to a relationship. So I would ask you to explain to me the difference between Moichin and Midas and Atzilus than between Etzem and Ispashtus Lifnei Tzimtzum. That would be the challenge. If you can answer that question well, then we could start talking about deeper things. But overall, even as I said, even in Atzilus, Moichin and Midas is also said the same thing. It's both Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad. Moichin reflects what God wants, and Midas reflects the objective to relate to another. So that is definitely rooted in Etzem Ha'er, Nispashtus Ha'er. But in Lifnei Tzimtzum, they're as I mentioned in the letter of the Rebbe, they're said at times it says it's Er Pashut. There are no levels. That was the question that was asked to the Rebbe in his letter that he responded. There are no levels. How do we talk about levels? So if you mean that there are no levels, everything is just, it's correct. But if you want to talk about how those levels, what they mean on that level, you have to make a lot of qualifications that I'm just mentioning now.
But in other words, if I wondered why it would be possible to talk about it, and when we were able to resolve
No,
that.
you could talk. Listen, the Rabbeim are talking about it. I'm saying they do discuss it. I'm just saying we need to, when we speak about it, we have to need to understand what is the difference between, as I said, Eir Ein Sof that relates to existence after the Tzimtzum, and Eir Ein Sof that relates to Atzmus after the Tzimtzum. Then we can move it back. But before the Tzimtzum, for all practical purposes, it's all divine, seamless consciousness. But God is giving us a little peek at how he processes it within himself, if you wish. So it's like I said with the artist, processing it all within himself, and there's no art yet, there's no creation yet. So I don't know if that helps you or not. I'm not sure if that answers your question. I'm not really sure where you're going, but that's the way I would explain it. So if you're talking about within himself, yes, he's giving us a peek into the process. But if you're talking about be'etzem, the whole thing is all within himself. So it's all relates, it's really atzmistic revelations, basically.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between an er atzmi and an er ispashtus. He made it very clear. There's a fundamental difference.
I heard that. So that's
where's
why
that difference manifest? It doesn't manifest lifnei tzimtzum, it manifests la'achar tzimtzum.
Yeah, that's why I was asking if Lifnei Tzimtzum, that is Pashtus, it started. There would be another.
I don't know what means started. That's the question. The word started is a very started. We know there's a level like that. I don't know if the word started would be the right word. I would just say God is giving us a peak Lifnei Tzimtzum, but you have to make all the qualifications. Understand Lifnei Tzimtzum doesn't work like La'achar Tzimtzum. La'achar Tzimtzum, there's actually levels. There are no levels Lifnei Tzimtzum. It's only language to understand the inner working, so to speak. And God wanted us to understand it to some extent. That's all I'm really saying. I'm not saying much more.
Okay. All right. Gosh, it's still not the question I was asking. I know we're still talking around.
I don't know what your question is then.
The question is very simple. Is there his Pashtus or Lifnei Tzimtzum, where there's your reader?
There is no ispashtus in any way lifnei tzimtzum. It's all within kol batzmusei. Why don't you go back to the letter of the Rebbe and the explanation? That's where I discussed it at length. I discussed this exact point at length there.
Okay, try to.
How could you say levels before the tzimtzum when before the tzimtzum there are no levels? That's the question was asked to the Rebbe, and he wrote a long letter, relatively letter to explain that. And I explained it at length.
I read that letter.
Okay. Okay. Chapter 18.
Okay. Thank you.
V'hinei kol ma shenizboyer b'inyan harotzim shem beis madreges. He's now continuing. And this is now the top of page 1149 in Ayin Beis. He says like this. All that was explained earlier about desire, shem beis madreges, that there's two levels in desire. Koyach harotzim, the power of rotzen, the power of desire. V'rotzen de muhus mitziyusehu shu ba'atoya v'amshachal eiseh davar shu reitzebei. It's interesting. Every time he says muhus mitziyuseh, muhus mitziyuseh. So there's the koyach harotzen, which is clearly not muhus mitziyuseh, the power of rotzen, and then the muhus, the personality of the existence of the desire, which is in a state of inclination or being drawn or pursuing, being drawn to the thing that he desires. Oi, the other name for it, Ratzon Hanelam, the Ratzon Hagoli, the concealed desire and the revealed desire, all that we discussed, hu b'derech klal. That's in general. So if you remember Ayin Beis on page 1149, he now breaks it down into three levels. So he's the Frierdiker Rebbe beginning now in his own words, that what we learned before about two levels is b'derech klal. That's in general. Aval b'derech prat, the Rosh Tevis is b'derech klal and b'derech prat. But when you break it down more specifically, hine bebinyan harotzen mit chilose at shabor etzene bepeil, the structure of desire from its inception, from its genesis, until it's actualized, at shabor etzene bepeil, that is desire is actually actualized. The zeu shleimus harotzen, that's the complete rotzen. Rotzen is not completed until you finish. So if you want to have the whole picture or the whole structure of rotzen, you have to begin from the earliest points when the rotzen emerged to the conclusion when the rotzen is fulfilled. That's shleimus harotzen. This is the Frierdiker Rebbe's original language. It's not Ayin Beis. It's a very, I would say, beautiful way. He's like in a very summarized way giving us what we're discussing. The structure, the binyan harotzen. It's a good line, it's a good expression to underline. The zeu shleimus harotzen, that's the complete desire. Hariyesh b'zeh gimel inyanim. So he said, in general, it's two levels, and he gave the names for it. Koyach harotzen and muhus matziyusei, which is the inclination, the being drawn, or concealed rotzen or revealed rotzen. Says that's in general. Specifically, when you break it down specifics, the structure of rotzen from beginning to end consists of, there's three levels in it. And now he's going to explain these three levels. The rotzen hakloli, these are the three. Rotzen hakloli, the general desire. Rotzen haprati, specific desire. The rotzen hakodum, and primordial desire, the desire that precedes the actualization of it. This is the Ayin Beis on top of 1149. So you shouldn't be surprised. We already learned this. The introduction of the first 5 lines is the Frierdiker Rebbe's introduction to explain what his father wrote on page 1149. Okay. So now we have 3 new names. Well, not mamish new, but Rotzen HaKodim is definitely a new name. He didn't mention it. That's the 3rd level. So now he broke the 2. He's breaking it into 3. The beheskim, when you're dealing with a heskim, remember, heskim is the level 1. The determination. It's already inspired and already stimulated. It's not pre-stimulation, but it's a form of determination, and it's not hatoyev amshach. It's not being drawn to anything, to the desire, to the object of the desired objective. The beheskim, even though it's Yeridas Ha'atzmus, as we learned earlier, it's not the etzem. It's Yeridas Ha'atzmus, is the atzmus lowering itself. Lias mischaber ledover zulase, in order for him to attach himself, to connect with something outside another. This is only a descent compared to the core soul. The way it is in his core essence prior to this determination. However, on the other hand of the coin, the other side of it, despite that it's a Yerida compared to the core essence that has not even determined, the determination itself he doesn't say the determination itself has not yet created anything, any entity. In any type of specific shape in the core of its mitzias. In other words, when you talk about the next level that's going to be drawn to the object, and there it envisions and starts already relating to the details, you have something to talk about. Here in the determination, I want a home. I want to create art. I want to create existence. There's nothing there that you can talk about. All you can talk about, it's not atzmus hanefesh anymore, because now it's a determination. So the determination for the general concept that I want a home. But like he says again, nothing has come from it. In any type of specific or detailed shape. The Einza Ella, what is it then? Mashanisava mitzias muhuse bulvad. Einza Ella. Not sure what this line means. Okay. Yeah, the Frierdiker Rebbe is adding now something we all discussed earlier. He's saying mitzias muhus, not muhus mitzias. By the second desire, he called it muhus ha-mitzias, the muhus of the mitzias of Ratzon. What's the mitzias of Ratzon? An active desire. What's its muhus? That it's being drawn to the object. That's what he called it. Now he's saying this oir, or this Ratzon kloli, heskem, this determination is the only thing you could say is that it's the mitzias of the muhus. So the muhus and the muhus of the muhus, he just said, is predetermination altogether. Maybe not. Maybe what I just said is wrong. Maybe the muhus of Ratzon, I'm not sure. But he definitely is saying that now what's happened, the determination, all it's done has not created anything. It's not in any detailed shape and form at all. All it is that something became a mitzias of the muhus, which means something from the muhus, the manifestation of the muhus has manifested. So we have a determination, that's all, period. So it's not the mitzias of Ratzon, it's the mitzias of the muhus of Ratzon. I will explain this more tomorrow because it's already, I have to move on to some other things here. So this is all additions of the Frierdiker Rebbe. It doesn't say this in Ayin Beis. But he's clearly saying here that here's a level that's outside of the core soul, but it's not in any form or shape, and you can't yet call it anything was created from it. It's just a determination. But the determination is now identifying as being called Nisava Mitzias Muhuse Bulvad. Now, I believe the next page he's going to discuss and explain what that means more in detail. So be patient and we'll get to it. Okay? So we'll stop here at the bottom of page 80. We didn't learn so many pages. We just skipped from 57 to 80.